While chatting with his friends, he suddenly felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his eye. The woman next to him leaned in kindly to check. To her horror, she witnessed something terrifying. A bug suddenly darted across Jack's eye. Seeing Amy's terrified expression, the captain took the flashlight and checked again, but found nothing unusual. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, assuming Amy was just too tired and had imagined it, and suggested they all go back and rest. But just as Jack went to splash some water on his face, a searing pain suddenly tore through his eyes. Amy and Tom rushed over to help, but before they could reach him, Jack let out a horrific scream. Blood dripped into the sink, which was now crawling with writhing parasites. Jack fell to the floor in agony, thrashing wildly and begging them to save him. Amy rushed to cover his eyes, trying to stop the bleeding, but within minutes, Jack went completely still. Staring at his mangled body, Amy realized they had been infected by some kind of parasite without even knowing it. Thinking about how Jack had washed his face before he died, she guessed the parasites might be spreading through the water. The first mate ran to shut off the water immediately, while Bailey was still showering, completely unaware. Realizing something was wrong, Amy and Tom rushed to the bathroom to warn him to turn off the shower. But Bailey didn't take their panic seriously, even thinking they were just messing with him. Unbeknownst to him, a tiny glowing parasite had already burrowed into his skin from behind. Then the shower head suddenly burst, and countless glowing parasites poured out and swarmed over Bailey. Hearing a scream from inside, Amy pulled out a knife and pried the door open, only to find Bailey crouched there, covered in blood. The chain of horrors plunged the entire ship into despair, and Amy even hid in her room, breaking down in tears. She couldn't comprehend how a simple research trip had turned into this horrifying nightmare. But all of this had been set in motion the moment they boarded the ship. To finish her PhD thesis, Amy had decided to join a fishing boat for field research. Being a marine biology PhD, Amy immediately drew the crew's curiosity and a warm welcome. But when she took off her coat and revealed her red hair, their expressions froze, and they quickly backed away. In old fishing superstitions, red hair was a bad omen, a curse that could doom the entire ship. Even though they disliked her hair color, the captain and his wife reluctantly accepted her to help settle their outstanding debts. When the couple planned their route, they discovered their usual fishing grounds had been declared a whale protection zone by the Coast Guard. Going somewhere else would cost more time and fuel expenses they simply couldn't afford. Crushed by debt, the captain made a terrible decision and ignored the warnings, steering straight into the restricted zone. At first, it seemed like luck was on their side. A massive school of fish appeared not long after they entered the zone. But before anyone could celebrate, the boat suddenly shook violently, as if it had hit a reef. Everyone rushed out to check and found something deeply unsettling. Strange scars had appeared across the deck. Curious, Amy poked it with a pen and a stream of disgusting glowing slime immediately oozed out. To find out what it was, she scraped some of it off with a spoon as a sample. But the captain pried open the corroded wooden plank with his hands, revealing a writhing, grotesque creature unlike anything they had ever seen before. He guessed it might be some kind of barnacle parasitizing the hull, but Amy flatly rejected the notion. Determined to uncover the truth, she donned a diving suit and plunged into the sea, heading toward the dark underside of the ship. But the sight beneath the water sent chills down her spine. Bizarre, massive tentacles glowed ominously around her. Amy tried to cut them away with a knife, but the tentacles clung stubbornly to the planks, refusing to budge. As she looked down to switch tools, two glowing tentacles slithered silently up behind her and lunged. But Amy barely managed to dodge in time. When she traced the tentacles into the depths, she was horrified to see that they all converged on a monstrous deep-sea creature. Terrified, Amy scrambled back to the surface, breathless, and told the captain and crew everything she had seen. Upon learning that the creature had numerous glowing tentacles, the captain immediately concluded it was an unknown giant squid. Blinded by the potential profit, he ordered the crew to start hoisting the squid aboard immediately. Recalling the terrifying behemoth lurking below, Amy urgently urged them to call the Coast Guard before doing anything. But the crew, blinded by visions of wealth, ignored her warnings and eagerly lowered the nets and winches. Under the immense pull of the winch, the creature remained unmoved, instead extending more tentacles that latched onto the fishing boat. Seeing the boat tilt dangerously, the captain had no choice but to order the winch released and abandon the hull. As Jack stepped forward to shut off the winch, his hand was accidentally caught in the mechanism. A crew member hurriedly cut the power, freeing him, and rushed him to the cabin for first aid. Nearby, a shaken Amy picked up Jack's fallen wallet and noticed it was smeared with glowing slime. Before she could even process it, a larger fishing vessel appeared ahead, and Amy excitedly shouted to the captain. The captain, however, felt uneasy. Calling for help would mean splitting the giant squid with others. Reluctantly, he fired a flare for help, but there was no response at all. With no other option, the captain took Amy and a crew member in a small boat to investigate. Once aboard, they found the bridge deserted, and even the radio equipment had been sabotaged. With nothing useful on deck, the three cautiously made their way into the ship's interior to investigate. They reached the dining area and were met with a horrifying sight. The room was soaked in dried blood. All the crew members had bizarrely taken their own lives inside the cabin, some leaving behind trails of blood. Trying to stay composed, the captain reasoned that long-term insomnia and sea fever had driven them to madness and suicide. To avoid panic, he warned the two not to tell the remaining crew, and the three returned to the fishing vessel. Fortunately, the first mate reported that the creature had inexplicably released its grip, and the captain immediately ordered full speed ahead. But not long after, the radar detected a massive creature hurtling straight toward them. Clearly, the beast had been trailing them all along, sending a wave of panic through them. Fortunately, the crew had hauled in a bountiful catch, momentarily easing their fear. That evening, while the crew celebrated their haul, Jack grew inexplicably restless, even edging toward the railing as if he wanted to leap into the sea. The captain initially thought Jack's fever was caused by an infected wound, and told him to return to his cabin to rest. Suddenly, Jack's eyes burned with excruciating pain, and before everyone's horrified eyes, he succumbed to the parasitic infection on the spot. Seeing the bodies on the ship with the same symptoms as Jack, Amy realized the parasites were spreading through the water supply. Although the first mate rushed to shut off the water valve, Bailey, still in the shower, was already drenched in blood from the parasites. After quickly dressing Bailey's wounds, the group headed to the lower deck to inspect the water pipe connections. As expected, the parasites had chewed through all the filters, leaving the ship's freshwater completely contaminated. Tom quickly shut the main water tank valve, hoping to trap the parasites inside, but Amy insisted on opening it to identify the species. The moment they opened the metal door, a parasite lunged out, but Tom reacted just in time, stomping it to death. Amy, however, couldn't identify the parasite and could only guess that it was connected to the deep-sea creature. This brought a glimmer of hope. Perhaps marine parasites couldn't survive long in freshwater. Perhaps in a few hours they would become inactive. And in the meantime, they had no choice but to suspend using freshwater. The next day, Amy and Tom returned to the water tank, and sure enough, most of the parasites were moving sluggishly. Amy tried to scoop some for research with a net, but the moment she reached in, it was shredded to pieces. Clearly, the parasites weren't completely dead. All they could do was continue to wait. That night, while everyone prayed, Amy suddenly noticed blue slime glistening on the floor. She rushed back to the cabin and placed the sample under the microscope. What she saw sent chills down her spine. The blue slime was crawling with parasites, wriggling like tiny tadpoles. She speculated these were the eggs of the deep-sea beast, reproducing by parasitizing animals. The creature had mistaken the fishing vessel for a whale, wrapping all its tentacles around the ship. Jack had come into contact with the slime when he was injured, allowing the eggs to enter his body through the wound. After the long voyage, everyone had small cuts and scrapes, and if they didn't find a way to neutralize the eggs, death would be inevitable. The crew immediately poured disinfectant into the water pipes, but it did nothing to stop the eggs. Drawing on her lab experience, Amy realized that ultraviolet light might be able to destroy the eggs. She quickly teamed up with Tom to rig a makeshift UV lamp from a phone and aimed it at the eggs. But the weak UV could only destroy a handful of eggs, far from enough to sterilize the entire ship. Just as they were sinking into despair, Amy's eyes landed on a desk lamp, and suddenly a bold idea struck her. They drenched the entire fishing vessel in seawater, donned insulating gear, and laid wires across the deck. Sparks flew in every direction, and an explosion rang out from the bow, burning their only life ring with the surge of electricity. Fortunately, after testing a few samples, Amy confirmed that the electric current was enough to kill the parasites. But the real horror was far from over. 36 hours had passed between Jack's infection and the outbreak of symptoms. It was possible someone on board was already infected, and heading straight back to the city could spark a terrifying outbreak. Amy immediately suggested to the first mate that everyone be quarantined for 2 days, only docking once it was clear no one showed symptoms. But the crew, driven insane by fear, ignored her warnings and scrambled to escape. That very night, Bailey showed the same symptoms as Jack, and after a brief, desperate struggle, he went completely still. His death instantly proved Amy's suspicions right, and only strengthened the crew's desperate determination to reach land. Seeing that no one would heed her warnings, Amy made a drastic move. She quietly cast the stern rope into the sea. The rope instantly tangled in the rapidly spinning propeller, bringing the entire fishing vessel to an abrupt stop. After the ship halted, Tom rushed to the stern and stumbled upon Amy and the fallen rope. Sensing something was wrong, he yanked Amy into the cabin and quickly informed the captain and the crew. The elderly woman, furious at the truth, lunged forward, while the others demanded to know why she had done it. Amy remained calm and warned that there might still be infected on board, and no one could leave until it was safe. Seeing the fishing vessel couldn't sail, everyone had no choice but to go along with her. Since parasites had appeared in Jack and Bailey's eyes before they fell ill, Amy began examining everyone's eyes, one by one. Fortunately, Tom and Amy found nothing unusual when checking each other, and even the elderly woman and the first mate passed inspection. But when it was the captain's turn, the first mate saw a parasite flash across his eyes. The sight threw him into utter despair, and revealed an even more horrifying truth. In his greed to catch more fish, he ignored the Coast Guard's warnings and forced the ship into the restricted zone, setting all this in motion. When they realized that all this horror was caused by the captain and his spouse, Tom and the elderly woman furiously demanded they get out. But soon the elderly woman turned on Amy, convinced that her hair color had brought disaster upon them. She pretended to apologize, but her hand crept toward Amy's neck. Luckily, Amy reacted just in time, shoved her away, and bolted. But the elderly woman came after her, frenzied. Seeing herself about to be dragged down, Amy delivered a powerful kick. The elderly woman collapsed, lifeless. When Amy went down to inspect the body, a parasite crawled out of her eyes. The woman had already been infected. Amy intended to tell the captain and his spouse, but she saw the first mate emerge from the room, face etched with despair. The crushing blow completely broke the captain, and in the end he chose to take his own life. Having lost her husband, the first mate ignored all protests and boarded a lifeboat alone, leaving Amy and Tom behind on the ship. As they carried the others' bodies into the cargo hold, strange knocking sounds echoed from the bottom of the ship. Following the noise, they reached the water tank and realized the sounds were coming from inside. They cautiously lifted the lid, and 3 glowing tentacles sprang out, but they dodged just in time. Fresh water didn't kill these terrifying parasites. Instead, it seemed to make them evolve into an even more horrifying form. The entire fishing vessel had become a massive parasite nest and was slowly sinking. They had to escape immediately, to completely destroy the source of contamination. Amy poured gasoline on the deck, intending to burn the creatures alive. However, just as they set the ship on fire and prepared to leave in the lifeboat, Tom accidentally slipped and fell into the sea. Immediately, a tremendous force pulled him under. Clearly, the deep-sea monster had been relentlessly pursuing them. Amy didn't hesitate and jumped into the sea. Seeing Tom tightly entangled by a tentacle, she swam with all her strength and pried the tentacle apart, narrowly rescuing Tom. Even more fortunately, as soon as they returned to the lifeboat, they saw a Coast Guard ship approaching nearby. They hugged each other joyfully, but a sudden pain jolted Amy. Her palm had just been bitten by a tentacle. Seeing this, Tom quickly comforted her, saying that once back in the city, there would be a way to treat it. But Amy had already realized her fate. To prevent the disaster from spreading, she resolutely jumped into the sea, swimming alone toward the terrifying deep-sea creature. A single act of greedy trespassing led to the annihilation of the entire crew. This deep-sea nightmare had been destined from the start to be a fatal voyage.